Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to read The Spanish American War, Chapter 41, Volume C. The Spanish American War. Spain's time as a great world power was behind her. Still, she remembered the glory days of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand and clung tightly to colonies in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippine Islands. In Cuba, there were those, like the Americans in 1776, who wanted freedom to run their own country, especially as many of the Spanish officials seemed cruel and corrupt. So the Cubans rose up against the Spaniards. Naturally, most Americans sided with the revolutionaries. Now, this freedom movement came at the very time two rival American newspapers were fighting each other for readers. The Cuban story made exciting reading. Every day, the newspaper headlines would boldly tell of atrocities in Cuba. When there was no real story to tell, eager reporters would make one up. That's called yellow journalism, and good newspapers don't do it. Anyway, with all the scare stories, the American people began screaming for war with Spain. They wanted Spain to clear out of the American hemisphere, but Spain didn't want to leave Cuba. Spanish, Cuban, and American diplomats began meeting. They were trying to solve their differences quietly. Maybe they would have done so if the Maine hadn't sailed into the harbor of Havana, Cuba. The Maine was a United States battleship, and it had been sent to pick up American citizens if any trouble deployed or developed. Trouble did develop on the Maine. The ship exploded sky high. 260 American sailors were killed. A team of experts said the Maine had hit a mine. Spanish officials said the explosion came from inside the ship. 78 years later, in 1976, an investigation proved that the Spaniards were right. The screaming headlines of the New York Journal sold more than a million copies a day when the Maine blew up. Joseph Pulitzer's World sent its own divers to investigate the wreck in the Havana harbor. Internal combustion had started a fire that reached some gunpowder on the Maine. In other words, it was an accident. But in 1898, no one knew that. No one knew what really happened. The newspapers played up the Maine story. They called it a Spanish attack. A headline in a popular New York journal said, "Warship Maine split in two by an enemy's secret infernal machine." Remember, the Maine became a patriotic slogan for many Americans who demanded war with Spain. The American people went wild. They demanded war. Congress wanted war. Theodore Roosevelt wanted war. William McKinley was president, and he had fought in the Civil War. He knew the horrors of war. He wanted no part of one. People started calling him a coward. They didn't realize it usually takes more courage to say no than yes. Finally, McKinley gave in. War was declared on Spain. Theodore Roosevelt, who was now Assistant Secretary of the Navy, resigned at once. He wanted to get into this war. He organized a cavalry group which trained in Texas. The cavalrymen called themselves Rough Riders. They got that name from an old pony express. But when they got to the docks in Tampa, Florida, they found there was no room on the ship for only officers' horses. The Rough Riders wanted to fight, even if they had to be foot soldiers, so they called themselves Wary Walkers and headed for Cuba. In Cuba, they fought fearlessly. TR, most of all, He charged ahead with bullets flying around him. Along with the Ninth and 10th Black Regiments, the Rough Riders fought their way up two important hills, Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill. The Spaniards were at the top of the hills, shooting down on them. When those Americans took San Juan Hill, they went into history books forever. The war was short and popular. It was over in 113 days. Northerners and Southerners fought together. That helped heal some old Civil War wounds. Cuba won her freedom. Spain lost out. The United States took Puerto Rico as an American territory. In the Pacific, Admiral George Dewey sailed the Manila Harbor in the Spanish-held Philippine Island and destroyed a Spanish fleet. The Philippines became an American territory. So did Guam and Wake Island. At about the same time, American businessmen in the Hawaiian Islands asked the United States to annex those islands, and we did. Some native Hawaiians and many Filipinos wanted to be independent. They wanted to form their own nations. They weren't given a choice. American expansionists wanted the islands. The Filipinos decided to fight. They fought the United States valiantly. It took 75,000 soldiers, 4 times the number that fought in Cuba, to conquer the Filipinos. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge said, "We must on no account let the islands go. The American flag is up and must stay. Manila, with its magnificent bay and its prize and pearl of the East, it will keep us open to the markets of China." A Harvard professor called the Philippine fight an unrighteous war. Sam Gompers called it an unjust war, but few Americans agreed. Theodore Roosevelt came home from Cuba a hero. New Yorkers soon elected him to be governor. As governor, he worked so hard and did such a good job that political bosses hated him. They didn't know what to do. TR was trying to put them out of business. Then one of them got a bright idea. Why not nominate TR as Vice President of the United States? That way he would be out of New York and out of their hair. Roosevelt was ambitious. He was delighted to run for Vice President on the Republican ticket with William McKinley going for a second term. They were elected easily. No one knew an assassin had a bullet ready for President McKinley. Theodore Roosevelt was hiking in the Adirondack Mountains when a messenger ran puffing up the mountain with a telegram. McKinley was dead. Roosevelt was 42, younger than any president before him. His first day in the White House was his father's birthday. That, he believed, was a good omen. Mark Hanna didn't see anything good about it. He was a political insider who had been persuaded to help get TR out of New York and into the safe job of vice president. "Now look," Hanna said to New York Senator Platt, "the damned cowboy is president of the United States." By 1917, the United States controlled territories in North America, the Caribbean, Central America, and the Pacific.